The Death of the Author is a very important essay by Roland Barthes. It was published in the year 1967. It has implications on how we read, write, and interpret a literary or cultural text. The essay has a very provocative title, which announces the death of the author. It announced an important turn in the history of theory, that is, the moment scholars started to embrace post structuralism, discontinuing with structuralist school of thought. The essay discusses the relationship between text and author. The very first paragraph sets the tone for Barth's argument. The first paragraph can be divided into three parts. First, Barthes introduces a brief text from Balzac's story Saracen. Second, he raises questions relating to the relationship of author and text. How should we understand the relationship between text and the author? Third, Barthes explains or defines what is writing from his point of view. This is how he begins the essay. In his story Saracen, Balzac, describing a castrato disguised as a woman, writes the following sentence: This was woman herself, with her sudden fears, her irrational whims, her instinctive worries, his impetuous boldness, her fussings, and her delicious sensibility. Following this, he raises several questions. The question Barthes raises can also be taken as an instance of how a student of literature should approach a text. It is not merely understanding the summary, but it is very important for a student of literature or a scholar of literature to raise pertinent questions relating to the text that we read. Let's see what questions Barthes raises on Balzac's text. Who is speaking thus? Is it the hero of the story bent on remaining ignorant of the castrato hidden beneath the woman? Is it Balzac, the individual furnished by his personal experience with the philosophy of woman? Is it Balzac, the author professing literary ideas on femininity? Is it universal wisdom or romantic psychology? From the questions he raises, Barthes defines writing. He writes, We shall never know for the good reason that writing is the destruction of every voice, of every point of origin. Usually, writing is considered to be a creation of voice. But here, Barthes announces that writing is the destruction of every voice, of every point of origin. What is writing? Writing is that neutral, composite, oblique space where our subject slips away, the negative where all identity is lost, starting with the very identity of the body of writing. The French word écriture, translated as writing, has a different meaning for Barthes. Writing not only involves language but the idea of communication that has no identifiable author. It is a channel or source of a narrative whose source is understood by audience as obscure, oblique, or unknowable. Therefore, writing is neither subjective nor objective. It is a neutral, complex, ambiguous space where our subject slips away. A space where our identity is lost, starting with the very identity of the body writing. When a fact is narrated, the voice loses its origin and the author enters into his own death. It is the moment of death for the author, and it is a moment when writing begins. In ethnographic societies, the responsibility for a narrative is never assumed by a person, but a mediator whose performance may be admired but not his genius. Barthes mentions that the author is a modern figure. It is a product of a society emerging from the Middle Ages with English empiricism, French rationalism, and Reformation. These movements discovered the prestige of an individual. For empiricism, knowledge comes out of experience. For rationalism, reason is the source of knowledge. And Reformation is a movement that challenged hard and fast doctrines of Catholic Church. These movements emphasized on the importance of individual, his thoughts, and experience. Accordingly, in literature, we attribute importance to the person of the author. The image of literature found in culture is centered on the author, his person, his life, tastes, and his passions. Success or failure of writing is directed to the person of the author. Therefore, the author still reigns in histories of literature. Biographies of writers, interviews, magazines, as in the very consciousness of men of letters, anxious to unite their person and their work through diaries and memoirs. The interpretation of a work or explanation of work is always sought in the man or woman because it is the voice of a single person, the author confiding in us. In other words, the meaning of a text is sought in an individual and meaning is thought as the author confiding in us. Though the author remains powerful, there are instances which challenge the centrality of author. Malames emphasizes the necessity to substitute language itself for the person. He says it is the language which speaks, not the author. Writing is an impersonal vocation. The language acts and performs, not the author. Proust took the task of blurring the relation between the writer and his characters. He made the narrator not feel who is writing, but who is going to write. The novel ends when writing becomes possible. Instead of putting his life into his novel, he made of his very life a work for which his own book was the model. Surrealism, though did not accord language a supreme place, contributed to the desacralization of the image of the author. Linguistically, the author is never more than the instance writing, just as I is nothing other than the instance saying I. Language only knows the subject, not a person. Outside the articulation or enunciation, there is no person. It is the language that holds together the subject, not the person who articulates it. When we believe in an author, we consider author as the past of his own book. Book and author stand automatically on a single line, divided into a before and an after. The author is thought to nourish the book, which is to say that he exists before it, thinks, suffers, lives for it, and the author is in the same relation of antecedence to his work as a father to his child. However, modern scripture is born simultaneously with the text. He is in no way equipped with the being preceding or exceeding the writing. It is not the subject with the book as predicate, but there is no other time than that of the Annunciation. Every single text is eternally written here and now. Writing can no longer designate a function of representation, but writing performs. Writing is a performative in which the articulation or the enunciation has no other content than the act of by which it is uttered. Barthes also reminds us that the text is not a line of words conveying a single theological meaning, but a multi-dimensional space in which a variety of writings clash and blend or intersect. The text is a tissue of quotations drawn from the innumerable centers of culture. Here we are reminded of Julia Kristova's understanding of intertextuality. The writer is capable of mixing his writings to counter one with the others in such a way as never to rest on any one of them. The scripter no longer bears within him passions, humors, feelings, and impressions, but he has a dictionary from which he draws a writing that can know no halt. Life never does more than imitate the book, and the book itself is only a tissue of science, an imitation that is lost, infinitely deferred. Once the author is removed, the claim to decipher a text becomes quite futile. To give a text an author is to impose a limit on that text, to furnish it with a final signified to close the writing. This task suits criticism, the task of discovering the author, digging beneath the text. When the author is found, text is explored, the critic becomes successful. Writing is not a singular activity. In the multiplicity of writing, everything is disentangled. We can only follow the structure of writing but cannot decipher anything. We cannot ask what is beneath the writing because there is nothing beneath. The space of writing is encompassing. It cannot be pierced and it is not pierced. Writing continuously posits meaning and at the same time it evaporates it, carrying out a systematic assumption of meaning. Every time we think we made meaning out of a text, that meaning is exempted. It ceaselessly posits meaning. Every time we read a text, it posits meaning. Therefore, one cannot assign an ultimate meaning to the text. There is no fixed meaning. This revolutionary approach refuses God or refuses to fix a sender or refuses to fix a particular theological meaning. Let us now come back to Balzac's sentence. Who speaks? No one. The voice of the character is not the true place of writing. The true place of writing is reading. If text, as Barthes says, is made of multiple writings, then there is one place this multiplicity is focused, and that place is the reader and not the author. The reader is the space on which all the quotations that make up a writing are inscribed without any of them being lost. A text's unity lies not in its origin but in its destination, that is, the reader. Yet this destination cannot any longer be personal. The reader is without history, biography, or psychology. He is simply that someone who holds together in a single field all the traces by which the written text is constituted. We know that to give writing its future, it is necessary to overthrow the myth. The birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. What Barthes calls the birth of the reader may not necessarily signify the death of the author, but it certainly limits the authority of the author. As William Gass says, the idea of the death of the author cannot be compared with the idea of the death of God. The death of the author signifies a decline in authority, in theological power, as if Zeus were stripped of his thunderbolts and swans. He is, but he is no longer a god. When the reader assumes a very important role in the analysis of a text, the author becomes a free agent. The process of signification of signifier and signified can be changed.